Marita Golden is the author of 19 works of fiction and nonfiction. Her most recent work of nonfiction is The Strong Black Woman: How a Myth Endangers the Physical and Mental Health of Black Women. She is the recipient of many awards, including the Writers for Writers Award presented by Barnes & Noble and Poets and Writers. She has won an award from the Authors Guild and the Fiction Award for her novel After, awarded by the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Marita Golden has lectured and read from her work internationally. She is co-founder of the Zora Neale Hurston Richard Wright Foundation and is a veteran teacher of writing. She has taught at the University of Lagos in Nigeria and has served as a member of the faculties of the MFA Graduate Creative Writing Programs at George Mason University and Virginia Commonwealth University. In addition, she has served as Distinguished Writer in Residence within the MA Creative Writing Programs at Johns Hopkins University, Prince George's County Community College, and the University of the District of Columbia. As a literary consultant, she offers writing workshops, coaching, and manuscript evaluation services.
This is a wonderful anthology that showcased over 70 Black writers, and it showcased every conceivable genre at a particularly prescient moment culturally. And so many of the writers in the anthology went on to have brilliant careers. And as I was rereading the anthology over the last couple of days, it just became so clear that in these early works, whether the writer this was the first time they'd been published or whether it was an excerpt from a novel, it was clear that these were very talented writers who would be around for a while. So these are writers who, over the last 20 years, have established major, important, and impactful careers and garnered many, many fans. So we're going to have a panel discussion, and we've got Janet Hill, who is the mother and midwife of this wonderful anthology. And I'm just going to introduce everybody first, and then Janet and I will talk for a little bit about how the book came to be, about the Harlem Moon Imprint, and a little bit about publishing. And then I'm going to introduce the writers. And actually, I have a treat for everyone. I'm going to read the first paragraph of the story that these writers contributed to Gumbo. And so you'll get a little taste, and your imagination will be provoked as to how good these stories are. Bernice McFadden is the author of 10 critically acclaimed novels, including Sugar, Loving Donovan, Nowhere Is a Place, The Warmest December, Gathering of Waters, Glorious, and The Book of Harlem. She's a 4-time Hurston Wright Legacy Award finalist, as well as the recipient of 4 awards from the BCALA, and she's a professor of creative writing at Tulane. Janet Hill is the executive editor for Nelson Books, a nonfiction imprint of the publishing group. She is a publishing veteran, having worked in the industry for 25 years, with most of her tenure in senior level editorial roles. And she worked closely with Lynn Harris, and she was his right hand and his #1 editor. And while at Harlem Moon, while at Doubleday, she launched Harlem Moon, a paperback imprint and division of Broadway Books. Mitchell S. Jackson is the winner of the 2021 Pulitzer Prize in Feature Writing and the 2021 National Magazine Award in Feature Writing. His debut novel, The Residue Years, received wide critical praise and won a Whiting Award and the Ernest J. Gaines Prize for Literary Excellence. His other honors include fellowships, grants, and awards from the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation, among many others. Tananarive Due is an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She's an executive producer at Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. She and her husband collaborator, Stephen Barnes, wrote A Small Town for season 2 of Jordan Peele's The Twilight Zone on Paramount Plus, and 2 segments of Shudder's anthology film, Horror Noir. and she's written so many novels and nonfiction works that we all love. Crystal Wilkinson is the national award-winning author of Perfect Black, which won the 2022 NAACP Image Award, The Birds of Opulence, winner of the 2016 Ernest J. Gaines Prize for Literary Excellence, Water Street, and Blackberries. She teaches at the University of Kentucky, where she's professor of English in the MFA Creative Writing Program and associate chair of the English department. So Janet, let's talk about Harlem Moon and Gumbo. You worked for many years with the foundation. You were a fan, an angel of the foundation, a supporter, and then for a number of years you were on our board. Talk about what it meant to you to first work with the foundation and then to be responsible for bringing this anthology into the world.
First of all, I just want to say it's so lovely to see all the faces that I can see, and then all of these names, and then to hear just so many things, wonderful things about all the authors that like Mitchell and Crystal, who were in the book originally, and all that has happened, and even with all the careers, but everything that Tananarive do has, I mean, everyone has just blossomed and bloomed, and it's so wonderful. So, you know, I loved working with the Hurston Wright Foundation so much, and was there from almost the beginning, right, Marita?
Yes, yes.
I think right from the beginning.
We were calling you on the phone constantly, seeking your advice. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I remember taking the train down and meeting, and then becoming a member of the board. And it was such exciting work, and it still is exciting work. And it's still, I'm so glad that the foundation is around, because there are many others that are not around. I worked with I was on the board of a creative arts organization here in New York that did not survive. The Frederick Douglass Creative Arts Center did not survive. And that was a great organization with a great mission. So it's fantastic that the Hurston Wright Foundation is not only still here, but thriving. And so it was my joy and honor to work first at Harlem Moon, and then partner with Marita and Lynn Harris on Gumbo. It was really exciting. And I forgot that, I think it was your idea. Was it your idea, or was it Elyn's idea to do Gumbo, Marita?
I think it was my idea. And then I said, let's do an anthology. And then Lynn said, I want to co-edit it with you. And that was, of course, brilliant, because Lynn had so many fans, and he would bring in a whole new community of readers.
And it started the party. So that was the pre-party to the rent party, was getting Marita and Lynn together to do this book. And then, the many people who graciously, just donated their stories. Some people wrote new stories. Tananarive, you blessed us with a new story and an original story. And it was just an honor to work on it. And I pray that this book, now in its 20th year, finds new life, and that it continues. There is such a legacy of African-American anthologies. I guess we're going to talk about that a little bit, but there's Breaking Ice, and then there were just a number of them. Toni K. Bambara's
I Am a Black Woman,
and anthology.
This Bridge Called My Back.
This Bridge Called My Back, and then there was one called Best American Black short stories, collection of Black short stories, that was edited by John Henrik Clark, and they're still out there. And there's always an opportunity to create a new anthology with new writers, because people need a home, old and new, the classics. And then there was another one that I found, the name is escaping me right now, but that had, Zora Neale Hurston was in it, James Baldwin. There are a number of anthologies that were done that house our works. And they're so important, not just for people of color, but for everyone to read, to discover the richness of our stories, and that we are not a monolithic people, but as many as people as we are, there are that many stories. And so I'm a big fan of anthologies because I think it's just a wonderful way to discover, new writers and then be reminded of the classics as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. They're a great overview and they showcase the diversity. If
Yeah.
it's a horror anthology or a romance anthology or whatever, it shows you that there's a number of different ways to approach that genre. I kind of want to ask you a little different question. I know that this audience that we have is very diverse, and I'd like to ask you to talk a minute or two about how you became an editor. Many people wonder, how do you become an editor? And I'd like you to share how did you become an editor?
Well, editing is known as, in some circles, the accidental profession. And I went to Wesleyan. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I left. I did have one interview on campus for Procter and Gamble. I had on a blue suit that I don't even know where I got it. My mother sent it to me. I went to the interview and I heard, it was like I was having an out-of-body experience. This is not for you. This is not for you. Like, get out of here as soon as possible. So I had wanted to, I'm an introvert. I loved books from, I read books. I spent most of my time, I think I spent more time reading than talking when I was a kid. And I went to California after I graduated with a friend and spent some time, and I came back and I told my parents I was getting a job. I was moving to New York and I was getting a job in publishing. My father was reading the newspaper. He bent the newspaper down and he said, "Do you have a job?" And I said, "No." "Do you have an apartment?" And I said, "No." And he said, he flipped the newspaper back up. That was the end of the conversation. But 2 weeks later, and I kept telling my mother, I'm like, I'm moving to New York. I just had this thing. I'm moving to New York. I'm going to get a job in publishing. And I actually have to say that I wanted to really work in book publishing, but I was also open to magazine publishing too. So anyway, my mother was planning these things for me to do. And I was like, "Mom, I'm leaving." And I set this date and I got into my little car, drove to New York. I stayed with friends. And I do want to say that I was pulled over 3 blocks away from my house because I had been away at college and they had instituted a new left turn. So I had been pulled over 3 blocks away from my house, and the guy let me go. There were a whole row of people pulled over, and he let me go. He's like, "Where are you going?" And he saw my stuff. He's like, "Look, don't get any more trouble. Just go." Black police officer, bless his heart. So I drove to New York, stayed with friends. I started working in the Pottery Barn while I interviewed and tried to get, they used to have these publishing employment services, right, where you could, apply for jobs. And I really wanted to get a job at a mainstream publisher. I actually turned down working at John Wiley and another place, and I really wanted to work. And my father finally called me. He started calling me and saying, "What are you doing?" And I ended up calling everyone that I knew. And I had worked with a woman, I had gone to college with a woman who was working at a small publisher called Prager Publishers. And I actually went on an interview and got hired in the office. And it was my, that girl, Marlo Thomas in Sepia moment, where I ran downstairs and told my parents I had gotten a job in publishing. And I started there. And then 2 weeks after I was there, I had an interview that had at St. Martin's. Wasn't sure how it worked out. Anyway, I'm at this Prager Publishers for 2 years or 2 weeks, 2 weeks. And I get this call from somebody at St. Martin's, an assistant, who said, so-and-so was sorry he wasn't able to hire you. He got some pressure to hire somebody in-house. Somebody at Doubleday is looking for an assistant. It's my first moral dilemma of my 2-week short working career. And I thought, if I don't go on this interview, I'll never know. So I went on the interview, and ironically, my boss actually was out. She was ill a couple of days into my getting there. She got sick. She had like walking pneumonia or something like that. Anyway, I went on the interview. P.S. I got the job. And she was so nice. The woman's name is Edith Manahan. I don't know where she is, but when I told her that I was leaving, she said, I totally understand. And if there's anything that I can teach you that you think you won't learn there, please let me know. And she gave me a going away party, and I was there for 6 weeks. So I did give her a little time because I was only working at the Pottery Barn, so I had a little time, but so it was an accident, really, but not an accident. So I started out as an editorial assistant, and I actually had a great experience because I started off working for 2 associate editors, one of whom went on maternity leave about 3 months in. So she went on maternity leave. And so I was really sort of the baby who got, I was thrown into the fire because the other editor didn't want to be responsible for the person who was on a maternity leave. So I got to work on a lot of those books. So I really was able to, work on things that other editorial assistants weren't able to work on. I got to write, flap copy, present at sales conference, do a little light editing. And so it was a really, wonderful experience.
So you really came up through the ranks, literally.
Yeah, I started as an editorial assistant.
Yeah.
Actually, the title then was not even editorial assistant. Haha, it was editorial secretary.
Right.
So,
I
but
know what you mean.
that's how I started. And then, so I was at Doubleday for 22 years and I left. I was a vice president and executive editor. So what was interesting about that time is I started there in 1986. And then I left in 2007. And it was very interesting because publishing changed so much during that time. There were the, go-go 80s and all of these things happened. And also just to be at Doubleday was interesting because when I started there, Nelson Doubleday owned Doubleday. And then it was bought by Bertelsmann. And then, all these many changes. So I learned a lot of lessons in, when there's a regime change. You basically, head down, door closed, do the work.
Okay. Thank you for that, Janet. Now I want to turn to our writers, our contributors, and I want to start with Crystal. Crystal Wilkinson, I'm going to read the first paragraph from your story, My Girl Mona, and then I'd like you to talk about who were you when you wrote this story and where did this story come from? My Girl Mona. He's short and bald, round like a black snowman, but handsome. He's my head doctor, the 3rd psychiatrist I've seen this year. The doctor leans back in his soft green leather chair and brings the tips of his fingers together like he's wise. He's not the smiley type. He nods, and that's my cue to start talking. Mona is 43 and still got the kind of body that makes brothers act like a fool, I say. I look at Doctor like, you know what I'm saying. Doctor clears his throat. We were sitting in that little diner off US 150, catching up like we do once a month, I tell him. I was sipping my 7-Up, trying not to think about how much better Mona looks than me. More kids, more husbands, but she still looks like she did in junior high. Dark skin, perky titties, a waist that curves in tight, then fans out into an hourglass for miles. Who were you, Crystal, and where did this story come from?
Wow. That story was an exploration in voice. I think that maybe I was in graduate school. I can't remember, but I do remember experimenting with voice. Having dived back into Gail Jones and knowing the value of the story on the tongue, I wanted to play with that. So I remember that. And that story actually, it had won an award. The Indiana Review, long before I worked there, had chosen it for their story of the year. And it became a part of my book, Water Street. It became a part of a short story cycle. And so that character had already developed. And who I was still working in public relations, trying to be a writer, single mama with 3 children. And I would write during my lunch hours. I would come home at night and have my whole family trained. The kids would peep through the door like, Mama, can we come in? And I'm like, just give me a few more minutes. And the foundation was a big part of that, because I had been working in isolation like many writers, but here in Kentucky, and had not had the experience, being from rural Kentucky and being from an all-white town and then going to almost an all-white college, and then moving here to Lexington, I had not had the experience of being surrounded by Black people outside of church. And so I was working in public relations at Midway College, and I saw the advertisement for the Hurston Wright Writers Week, the very first one in '96.
Wow. I remember
in
you.
the back of Essence magazine. And so I asked the president of the college if I could borrow the presidential car, which was a big Cadillac with wings on the back. And I drove to VCU that first year to be a part of the conference. And so being in this anthology was just an extension of that. You know, it was just like, you know, my spine got straighter. I was just in my element, surrounded by other writers who I still know and love after all these years. And then being in this anthology and being the last story, and
because you're W.
Yeah, it was just really wonderful. It opens with Edwidge Endicott, right? And then goes all the way through. It's just I just remember flipping through the pages and looking at the names over and over and over. And then it's been interesting over the years to look through the names again and see where everybody is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Such a special time.
Yeah, that's a great story. Tananarive Due, knowing. Our teacher said one day that knowledge is power. And I had to raise my hand, even though I don't like to. I like to sit and be quiet and watch and wait for lunchtime. But I had to ask him if he was sure about that. Maybe knowledge wasn't just a curse. He asked me what I meant by that. And I said, hey, that's what my mama always says. Knowing is her curse, she whispers, touching my forehead at night, softly, her long fingers like spider's legs. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and she's there whispering and rocking me. But I didn't tell my teacher that part. I could tell from the way my teacher looked at me sideways and went on with his lesson that he thought I was trying to be a smartass. People always think you're something you don't want to be. Mama says that too. Tananarive, where'd that come from? And who were you back then?
I was blessed. I was blessed to be entering publishing like many of us in the wake of Terry McMillan and Lynn Harris, frankly. And that tsunami they created so that editors and publishers were willing to take a chance on supernatural stories and Black horror long before it came into fashion like it is now. And that, you know, I was really lucky that I started publishing novels before I ever published short stories, which is a little bit backwards because I practiced short stories for years, could not sell most of them. The one time I did sell one, they went out of business before they could publish it. And I was, you know, off to the races with The Between in 1995. And I think I'd published 3 novels by the time I was invited to take part in this. But it was such a thrill to be asked to write a short story. And I'm so glad I have. That story was just republished in my anthology back, just in 2013.
Great.
Why does time go by so fast?
Yeah.
But what that excerpt makes me think of, besides how refreshing child narrators are because of their resilience and their acceptance of the uncanny, and in a way that they can kind of lead us, the way they can figure out our iPhones before we can. They also have other superpowers. But really, I put up this photo behind me. Actually, that's my late mother.
Yeah, I saw that.
Of me with Lynn Harris and my late mother, Patricia Stevens Dew. I mean, they were just great buddies. I don't know if they ever called each other on the phone, but they gave each other's gifts. And I think Lynn Harris's generosity of spirit to me really encompasses what this period felt like. You know, we were at the end of the 90s. I mean, the 90s were the big boom. So by the time this came out, we would notice a tapering off, shall I say, of some of that dream world we were living in. So many thriving Black bookstores, so many Black booksellers hand selling our books, a sense of community, which Lynn Harris was just all about that. So encouraging, so supportive in every way. His last text, emails to me, just support, even when he was having his own struggles and concerns. So Yeah, in some ways, I kind of feel like I was that little kid, you know, in that short story, coming of age in a Black literary renaissance. And I'm so glad to feel like we're having another Black arts renaissance now. You know, it doesn't look the same way it did,
Right, exactly.
but it
And
really
I think,
feels
yeah.
like it's happening again.
And I think that probably the Renaissance is continuing. I don't think we're going to have every 20 years a Renaissance. I think we have these institutions like Hurston Wright, Cave Canem, Cambilio, Quayle. We have all these institutions, all these communities that are constantly feeding Black writers. So I don't think we have to wait for another Renaissance. I think the Renaissance is pretty much always going to be with us. And to talk a minute about the 90s, we were around, you know, the youngins never saw this, that summer of 1998, where 3 Black women were on the bestseller list at the same time. Terry McMillan, Alice Walker, and
Toni Morrison.
Toni Morrison, all 3 at the same time.
Amazing.
It had never happened before.
Right.
I'm waiting for it to happen again. Absolutely amazing. So you're right, that was a really special time. But I think that Gumbo said, you know, we're moving into a new phase and we're not going away. Thank you, Tanana Reeves.
Great.
Bernice McFadden, Luscious. Before she was Luscious, she was Rita. Little wide-eyed Rita, daughter of Erasmus and Bertha Smith, hardworking people who knew God, but not every Sunday. They drank some and sometimes too much, played their Billie Holiday records for the neighborhood, whether their neighbors wanted to hear them or not, loved more than they fought, but fought just the same. Had the scars and broken knickknacks to prove the latter, Rita to prove the first. Before she was Luscious with a number and a cellmate, she was Rita of Detroit, Rita of Cadillac Avenue, tall, red-boned Rita, who swayed down the street on long, lovely legs so well oiled they gleamed. Rita with the green eyes and good hair that touched the middle of her back. Rita so fine the white people forgave and forgot her thick lips and broad nose. That is from your novel, correct, Bernice?
Yes. Yes, that's from
Where'd she come from? Where'd Rita come from?
Rita is a composite of several women in my family. So, you know, you all know that I love the people in my family, especially the women. They have all of these really interesting stories. I chose Detroit for that story because I was spending a lot of time up there at the time.
I'm from Detroit.
And okay, I have a slew of family up there. And so, you know, just sitting there one day, I was writing a story about a heartbreak is really what I was doing. But, you know, that was the center of the story, but, you know, I needed these filler characters. And as always, I just turned to my family, and Rita just stepped out of the woodwork. And I was like, oh yeah, I know you very well. And the other part of that story is that when my grandmother, who passed last year, when she became pregnant at 15, her grandmother, who had raised her, said, you know, who has fathered this child? And my grandmother said, the Coca-Cola truck driver. And this is, you know, 1940s. And my great-great-grandmother said, ain't no goddamn Black men driving Coca-Cola trucks. So that just stuck with me. Like, that story just stuck with me. And I think, Marita, I had met you at the Hurston Wright Awards in 2001. I think that was our first meeting. And I was so excited because you had taught me. You was my teacher without knowing you was my teacher. And then when I got the call or the email from you to contribute, it was such an honor for me because that was my first contribution. That was the first call I received from any author saying, hey, come on and join us. And so I just want to thank you. Thank you for that. And Lynn, my experience with Lynn was I was on tour for one of my books, and I was just sitting up in my hotel room and the phone rang. And he's like, is this Bernice McFadden? I was like, yes. He said, this is Lynn Harris. And I was like, who's this playing games with me? And no, he's like, yeah, it's me. And he said, I want to fly you up to Chicago and have a book party for you. And
that's Lynn.
We had such a good time, and I miss him so much.
Yeah, that's him. That's him so much. He lived large and he gave away so much of himself. He was really, really one of a kind. That just sounds exactly like him. Yeah. Mitchell S. Jackson, Friday. No, I'm reading. I'm not. Where is yours? Where is yours, Mitchell? I know I got it. Here it is. Yeah, that is right. Friday, payday. And Rhonda quickly found a place in line at the check cashing store. A faded blue Taco Fever uniform hung loosely around her thinning frame. Fresh stains covered older stains that persisted despite several washings. She fidgeted, trying to eliminate any negative thoughts. The more she tried to escape them, the stronger they became. Rhonda knew that she didn't have any money to spare. There never was any money to spare. $312, 2 weeks' pay, just enough to pay the rent and buy a few groceries for her empty cabinets and refrigerator. Tell us about Rhonda and the story and who you were.
Well, first of all, thank you. It's really a joy to hear these stories. I'm mad I missed out on this Lynn generosity. But I do remember the generosity of Jewel Parker Rose, who I was at Hurston Wright in the summer of 2001, studying with her. And out of that workshop, I probably workshopped the story. That's how I got into Gumbo. And it was the very first fiction publication that I had. So there's a marker for me that I can always mark my kind of literary career with the publication of Gumbo. I should also say that while I was there, I met Marie Brown, who was told me to look her up. I was a year away from moving to New York. She told me to look her up. And when I came to New York, she helped me get my first job just on her word. The woman was like, have you taught before? I was like, no. She said, Marie sent you? I said, yeah. She said, okay, you're hired.
Marita sent you, you're hired.
Yeah, that's it. So I was very, very, very thankful to Hurston Wright. It's my first time in DC. And when I hear this story, though, I hear the professor in me would go back and revise that. And I think, hearing something from your young self, like it's almost humbling. I'm like, damn, I don't know why they picked me, but I'm glad I got in there. Cause from there on, I would meet Black writers and then I would go back and see if they were in Gumbo. It was like the badge. It was the badge. And so I feel very fortunate that at that, I don't know, I maybe was mid-20s or something when it happened. Yeah, I was mid-20s, that I was able to join the ranks of the OGs.
Yeah. So you're an OG and you've had such a diverse career. Mitchell wrote an amazing, powerful story about Ahmaud Arbery, which is what he won the Pulitzer for. And it's a story about running. And I learned so much, about running, as well as about what an incredible human being that young man was. So, thank you for that. Before we take some of the questions in the chat, I see there's a lot of activity going on. I'd like to ask everybody, what are your current projects? I know, Tanana Reeve, you have to leave us in about 7 minutes. So I'm going to ask you, what are you currently working on? The question we all dread.
Yes.
Everybody always asks, and I hate it when people ask, particularly when I'm signing a book that just came out. And
I know, right?
What am I doing? But I'm going to ask it anyway.
Can we rest? No. Well, I've been I spent a lot of time trying to break into Hollywood, still trying to do that. So there's been a big gap between my books, but I do finally have another novel coming out next year called The Reformatory that is based on family history. I had a great uncle who died at the Dozier School for Boys in the 1930s. So I fictionalized it and set it in 1950. And I'm just trying to repair history with that one. And my first graphic novel, you can't really see it with my my virtual background out, just came out.
Oh, wow.
I want to thank the late L.A. Banks for encouraging me to look into graphic novels.
Wow.
And this was a story of a screenplay, a disappointment with a screenplay that didn't get produced. And an editor, John Jennings at Megascope Abrams, said that would be a great graphic novel. So I'm entering I feel like a kid again, entering a whole new way of expressing story. So just grateful to still be publishing, really.
I mean, and that's no mean feat to keep publishing for 20 years, given just the vagaries of our personal lives, the vagaries of the publishing industry. Really, it's really, we should all feel very pleased and proud.
Well, thank you very much.
Talent, and our luck.
Happy to be here.
But you know, but you know, they say you make your own luck, through hard work. Crystal, what are you working on?
I have a culinary memoir coming out in 2023 with Penguin, which was a hard left turn from what I've been doing. And then I'm working on another novel. And
now tell us about the culinary, because Miller, I'm hungry, just the thought of that.
Yeah, it's a food book that traces the furthest ancestor I could find, Aggie of color, who was born in 1795 in Virginia and brought to Kentucky in 1808 as an enslaved child. And then all the way up through to me and my daughters, and what food legacies we've brought forward from that period.
Wow, that sounds great. Very, very imaginative. Did you call it a culinary memoir?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Very exciting. Bernice?
I am working on a memoir, Firstborn Girls. It's about the firstborn girls in my family. There are 5 of us, I believe. So it was supposed to come out next year, but I'm behind. So 2024.
Mitchell?
I'm with you, Bernice. I'm behind too. I got a novel that will be published 1 decade. It's set in the 1960s during the Watts Revolt. So quite a bit of research for me, but I'm excited about it.
I've had a good year in that my novel, A Woman's Place, from 1986 has been reissued by McSweeney's. Beautiful cover, right? And Mango, my other publisher, brought out a new edition of Saving Our Sons with 50 pages of guidance and advice for people raising Black boys. And I am working on a new novel in the very early stages of it, trying to write my way past page 25. That's all I'm going to say. Janet, what are you working on? I'm curious, at your publisher, Nelson.
I'm really excited. In fact, I met with her today. There's a lady, when I was at Doubleday, I published a book called Crowns, Portraits of Black Women in Church.
Exactly, I remember that book.
And there's a lady named Dr. Laverne Ford Wimberly, who during the pandemic, she's now 83, she's 82 years old. She's a widow. She decided that she was going to, when her church, she's from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and when her church decided to go online during the pandemic, she had always dressed for church her entire life.
I heard about that woman.
She decided that she was going to continue to wear a hat and her Sunday best. And so she did that she posted on she did a selfie every week, did a little word of encouragement, posted for 52 weeks. A member of her church was a TV reporter interviewed her, and then the Washington Post caught wind of it, and then she actually ended up going viral. And so at the time, I was actually working at Guidepost, working at devotionals, and the agent for Crowns called me and said, "You need to, write a book with her, do something with her." And Guidepost is direct marketing, so I wouldn't be able to edit it, but I thought maybe I will write it. I could try, to do that, interview her, and then turn her book into a story. And then lo and behold, I was approached about this job at Thomas Nelson. And so I did contact her. She said she wanted to think about it. And then a week and a half later, I called her and I said, "Well, I can't write your book, but I can probably edit your book because I'm going to Thomas Nelson." And so we signed up the book. It is fantastic. What we discovered about her, she was not just a wonderfully clad woman in a church hat and with beautiful clothes, but she was really a hidden figure. She participated in the desegregation of the Tulsa school system. She's a first to do all these many wonderful things. And so the book is going to come out in March.
That sounds great. Great.
And I'm also working with the Martin Luther King estate, and we'll be putting together the first, it's going to be called Love in Action. And it's going to be the first Martin Luther King devotional.
Wow. That's great. That's great. Let me check what's going on in the chat room. Anybody has any questions before I go back to my questions? Okay, I want that devotional.
Okay, yeah, great. It'll be coming out in 2023, late 2023.
Right. Let me see, close. Yeah. I need a little help moving down the chats. I'm not always so good at that.
I don't think we have any questions in the
okay.
chat. We have
Yeah,
mostly just comments.
Mostly just great. Okay. What I wanted to ask next is what have you seen in the last 20 years in the publishing industry that has given you encouragement and that's given you concern? Crystal.
Well, I think the main thing that's given me encouragement is that it's how wide open it seems to be now. I love all of the risk people are taking with their books, and how free it is in some ways. Not that those books aren't haven't been well loved and well worked on, but it seems to be a point where we can use our own voices more, and all kinds of voices have a room at the table. I think it's still a concern that even though it seems like a lot of Black books are coming out, when you look at the percentages, we still are not equal. There's still so many good, wonderful, great Black writers who are not being published. So many untold stories.
Bernice.
I'm sorry, I was distracted.
No problem. The question was, when you look at the publishing world as it is today, what gives you encouragement? What gives you concern?
Well, I'm so encouraged by all of the Black authors that are being published. I mean, Jesmyn Ward, who is my colleague here at Tulane, won 2 National Book Awards. I never thought that I would see that in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And I think with that win and others, another door has opened to allow a slew of new writers to come through. What am I concerned about? Having been in this industry for 22 years, I'm concerned about writers who are published and immediately thrown into the upper echelon of this business, right? And what goes up must come down. Type of thing. But it's I think slow and steady wins the race. But first book, New York Times bestseller, this, that. And I feel for them because we all experience rejection. We've all had some years when maybe we didn't sell too well. We know how destabilizing that can be. So that's my concern.
I think one of my major concerns that I had when we started the foundation that exists today is the absence of viable Black publishers. Now, of course, Haki just celebrated 50 years at Third World, and we have Black Classic Press. But in reality, we still need a Black-owned press that has the wherewithal and everything it takes to really publish a lot of these writers that, you know, we're talking about that don't get published. I take my hat off to Johnny Miller over to Kashik, who single-handedly publishes probably a good portion of the most significant Black literary writers. He's doing a great job. But I'd like to see a Black version of that, a Black press that could do the same thing. And I think there are other things like we need more Black critics. We need more Black reviewers who are the ones who are saying, this is the book you must read, you know. So I think that from the creative end, we've got it all going on. But I think from the production end, the means of production, the control of the product, that's really where we're lacking. And many of the people don't realize that many of the most significant books written by Black people were not published by white publishers. The Miseducation of the Negro. Many of the books that came out in the 30s by people like J.A. Rogers and other Black people who were doing Black history before Black history became the thing, you know, first to teach and then to ban. And so what happens is the white publishing industry gets all this credit when in reality, there's so many smaller Black presses that were publishing really important books that were ignored. And then when they came back in, you know, those publishers didn't get the credit. So that's top of my wish list, is to get the money end, the business end really controlled. Janet, and you're right in it, so.
Yeah, you know, Jacob Lawrence had a poster that was done for the Schomburg, something at the Schomburg. It's very, very old, but it was about the need for Black publishers. And I think because when you're in a situation and you don't, you know, you can have a Black imprint, but if, you know, you need to own you need to own it. And ownership is really important. And you can tell any kind of story that you want to when you own it. You cannot tell any kind of story that you want to when you don't.
Exactly.
A concern for me is the prevalence of social media and platform, and all about, you know, looking for people who have a big platform, but that doesn't necessarily mean they can write a book.
Exactly.
They could write a book and the book may not sell. And so I just think that with that criteria, and many publishers, that is a main criteria for them, you overlook so many gems. There's so many people who are hard at work. And that includes people who may have already published a couple of books, but maybe for whatever reason they didn't, they were great books, but they didn't sell as well. And then these people get overlooked by, you know, others who have a bigger platform, but may not know how to write or write well. And there are people who they wake up, they write, or as Crystal, you were saying, you were writing on your lunch hour. I mean, people will write anytime they can if you're really a writer. And so I feel that
that's a real problem, because we're now at this point where the first question is, how many followers do you have?
Right.
You know, do you have a
Right.
website? You
Right.
know, are you blogging?
Mhm.
And no, I'm trying to be a good writer.
Right, because that takes a lot of it takes a lot of time to build that large social media, and so you know, background. And so if you're doing that, then when would you find time to write if you also have to work? So I still think that it's all about the writing, what's on the page, and you know, the story that's being told, and hopefully we can get back to that and away from the sort of you know, reliance on platform. I also think that it becomes a bit of a cop out for the publisher to use that in terms of marketing and publicity. There used to be a phrase called a make book. And what is a make book? A make book is a book that maybe it's a new author, or maybe it's somebody who's written a couple of books, but it's a really great book that people feel they can really make and get behind. And that was when, you know, people would roll up their sleeves, and marketing would do everything they could, you know, publishing can do, I mean, the publicity department would do whatever they could. You come up with a lot of creative ideas to push this book. And now it's all about, as you said, you know, how many followers do you have? And that to me does not, it's a frustration about, I think it's unfair for people really who have a heart to write and who, you know, it's what they do, they write, so.
We have a question in the chat about the current banning of books, and, you know, how we feel about that. Well, you know, books have always been banned. It's just every decade or so we go through this thing of banning ideas, you know, banning people, banning books. But I do think that that this particular banning spasm that we're in now is particularly concerning because so much of it is politically driven. It's not like, say, 30 years ago, you know, I would call the school, I don't want my child to read The Bluest Eye. Now it's political organizations get together and bombard the school with thousands of emails. And so sometimes the people who are complaining about what students are reading don't even have students in the school. So it's particularly pernicious and very, very concerning, very strange what's happening now. But I say, you know, the best thing you can do to fight banning books is buy books and write books and read a book to a child.
That's right.
There's a question about self-publishing, the pitfalls of self-publishing. I think in the last 22 years, we've certainly seen self-publishing become a viable alternative. That was when a publisher says no, you can say yes. And as a literary consultant, I work with numerous writers who are fantastic writers, who I will refer them to my agent. My agent loves the book. And they will get responses like, oh my God, you're such a wonderful writer. This is extraordinary, but we can't represent you. You don't have a platform. You're not famous. You're not infamous. And so that's why many people are finding self-publishing a viable alternative.
I'm wondering if those, if more Black people are receiving those types of rejections than our white counterparts.
I'm sure they are. Just as during the lockdown period, we found on social media that Black writers were getting a third of what white writers were getting. And one of my former mentees told me, is working with a white agent who's very supportive of his work and is essentially grooming him around his book. And she said, I'm going to be very honest with you. You're going to have to write this whole book. If you were a white lady, you could write half of it and I could go out and start shopping it, but you're going to have to write the whole book.
Fiction or nonfiction?
It's a memoir.
Memoir? Wow.
And usually I know years
Write
ago,
a proposal.
my agent told me 100 pages max, you know, a proposal, some chapters, we give them 100 pages, but she was very honest. And this is after George Floyd, you know, after all that supposed wokeness. So the last question I want to ask you, Crystal and Bernice, you both teach, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are your students writing about?
Oh Lord, what are they writing about? You know, I teach at a predominantly white institution. So it depends.
What are your Black students writing about?
My Black students are, you know, they are creating stories that represent what's happening in this country right now. I mean, obviously they're very concerned about what's going on. And so that's what they write about. I had one student who wrote this brilliant story where he personified a gun, and I just cannot get that story out of my head.
God.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. So yeah, they're doing some really interesting things. And then, you know, fantasy is such a big to do with them. And so, you know, this idea of seeing themselves in these worlds that they have created for themselves,
right,
is you know, quite fascinating too.
Right. Afrofuturism. Crystal?
I'm glad you said Afrofuturism, because that's what I was thinking. One of my students, I'll just say her name, Erica Simpson, has been writing these wonderful, she's graduated from her MFA program, but she is writing these wonderful stories that are just set just beyond where we are now. And so this speculative place of like looking at everything that Black people are going through a speculative view. Her stories are really fascinating. And I know a lot of young Black writers are doing that. And I think more risk-taking, like with lyricism and all kinds of things with form. Some of my Black writers are, and just, they seem to have permission to write about Blackness in interesting ways that I haven't seen before. Like one of my students was writing about Blackness without constantly pointing to Blackness. And I kept saying, are these characters Black? And she was like, of course they are. And so I think a lot of things that students are doing now are really interesting things that they're doing. And I hope they all get published. I've had lots of African writers that are writing with a particular lens toward the US that we haven't seen before too. So I'm excited about all the risks that they're taking. And they shouldn't be called risk even, all the different lenses that they're using.
Well, that's a great thing about being a citizen in this country. And in this country, we have this huge immigrant population of people coming here from all over the world. And that gives us a cultural legacy, a cultural bank account that's very diverse and very rich. So that, I mean, I just finished reading Celeste Ng's book, Our Missing Hearts, which is tremendous. And so I love to read Black writers, but I love to read all writers too. So I want to thank everybody. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Bernice. Tanana Reeve had to leave early, and I think Mitchell did as well. I want to thank all of you who signed up and who joined us tonight for this conversation. And I want to encourage you to continue supporting the Hurston Wright Foundation. And we're going to have actually a whole week of readings culminating in the Legacy Awards ceremony on Thursday night. So thank you again. And please let Khadija and the people at the foundation who are really in the trenches know that you enjoyed this program, because I know you did. And thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.